Hello guys, today we are going to install Gentoo Linux on VMware Fusion on Mac M1. For this, let's get the installation medium from gentoo.org site and create a new virtual machine. While creating a new virtual machine, we need to focus on something which is especially for M1. Uh, Select the SDD type as SATA and give the required number of CPUs and RAM. It is preferable to give as at least 4 GB of RAM because it requires a lot of processing power during the installation process. Once all this thing is done, we are now ready to boot up the system. Once the VM is booted, we need to prepare the disk. We are using a tool fdisk for this purpose. Fdisk is a command line utility used for partitioning hard drive in Linux based operating systems. We are going to have three partitions here. The first partition will be a boot partition, which is a EFI file system, and second will be a swap space of 2 GB, and the remaining space will be our root partition. The fdisk will give you the help menu once pressing M, and it is a very easy tool. You can follow the help menu to create a new partition, print the partition, and write the changes on the disk. Once the partition is done, we will make our third partition as a encrypted partition using crypt setup. Crypt setup is a Linux command line tool used for setting up encrypted file system on block devices. It is a part of LUKS, Linux Unified Key Setup encryption framework, which provides a standard on-disk format for encrypted partitions. In here, the command LUKS format formats the disk to an encrypted disk. While formatting, you need to give a key which will need for decrypting the disk, and LUKS open will open the disk. Now let's format the partitions. We will format the partitions. We will format the first partition, which is our boot partition, with VFAT file system. The second one with the swap, it is the swap, and we will make the third partition, our root partition, as a BTRFS file system. BTRFS, also known as ButterFS, is a next generation copy and write file system designed for Linux systems. It offers many advanced features like snapshot and sub volumes. Now it's time to mount the file system to the live environment. Once this is done, we can proceed downloading the required profile from the Gentoo site. For downloading the profile, we will use links command line browser, and we will wait till the download is finished. Once the download is finished, we will proceed with the next steps. We are using ARM system D desktop profile for our installation. Once the download is finished, we will navigate to MNT Gentoo folder and extract the files. Once that is done, we will mount the dev SDA1, which is our boot partition, to the MNT Gentoo boot directory. Now we are ready for the ch root environment. CS root is a technique to create a separate environment within the Linux system. We will do this with the above commands. On these commands, we are binding our live CDs directory to our new CS rooted directories. Once the binding is done, we will copy our current result.conf, which is for the internet access, to our new environment. Now we will chroot to our new environment, which is mount Gentoo. Once this is done, we will use Emerge. Emerge is the package manager for Gentoo system, which is used to install, update, and manage software packages. First, we will do the Emerge sync, which will pull the latest files from the Gentoo site for the building purpose. And once this is done, we will sync the repository. When the image sync is complete, we will now have to select the profile list, which is for the kernel profile. For that, we are using eSelect profile list. On this installation, we are using ARM64 17.0 desktop profile with systemd stable. Now it's time to make some changes in HC portage make.conf. We are using crypt setup and video cards for VMware video cards, because we are in VMware, and we accept license asterisk, which means we accept all the license. And for drop platforms, we are using ARM64 EFI, which is for like ARM based architectures. When the update is done, we can now dry run the emerge command to see what changes are we downloading, or what are we doing from pulling the content from the internet. And then we can do the real with the command in the screen. And let's wait for some time to the changes to be propagated. Now it's time to update our local. Locals are the set of environment variable that define the user language, region, and time, etc. We are using US ISO UTF for this installation. After updating the local.conf file, we can generate our new local, and we can select the newly generated local values. Now it's time to run the image Gentoo sources to pull the kernel file from the Gentoo site or Gentoo repository. Once the file is downloaded on our system, we will proceed for the configurations related to our system. The command make menu config gives us the result as in the screen, which allows us to select the profiles or features which are required to have on our system. Once that is done, we will save the new configuration and build the list of profiles, list of settings which needs to be selected for this installation. I will share this on a separate file. Once the compilation is done, we will have to proceed further with the bootloader things. It will take a lot of time to phase the content and compile it for the system, for your system. So we'll continue once the compilation is done. Now we are ready to prepare the Initramfs. The Initramfs is the initial RAM file system. It is a temporary file system which is loaded into the memory during the boot process. It contains essential file and drive required to mount a root file system and continue with the boot process. For this, we are using Immer's Quiet Gen kernel, which pulls the required packages, and we are using looks, so we are also pulling the looks for Initramfs. We will now update some files to for our swap to be re-encrypted using a different key as is boot, for which we are using urandom. In Unix like operating system, urandom provides some pseudo random numbers. Now it's time to update our fstep file. We need to be careful in this step. Like if any wrong entry in this fstep file will lead us into a non-bootable system. Here is a little mistake here, like there should not be EFI on the boot system. There should be VFAT. Apologies for this mistake. We need to be careful while updating this fstep file. Now it's time for install the bootloader. The bootloader is responsible for loading the kernel and initiating the boot process. Here we need to install EFI boot MGR, which is a requirement for installing Grob in EFI based system. Once it is installed, we are good to proceed with installing the Grob bootloader. We are using Grob bootloader in this system. Once the Grob is installed, we need to prepare a Grob configuration to load, which is required to be loaded before booting up the system. Once this is done, we will install the BTRFS procs, which are required for handling the BTRFS file system. We will now set up a password for root account for newly built system. Once that is done, we will set up the host name and network configuration for our newly built system. Once the configuration files are updated, we will have to enable these configurations so that it can be loaded on the next boot. Once this is done, we are now ready to reboot our system. And okay, our headless Gentoo VM is ready. Let's get login and do some post-installation processes like creating a new user and playing around with this VM. At the moment, we only have a headless system, means a CLI based environment. We will be going to install a GUI on this system. For that, I am using the Xorg server, simply called X. It is a windowing system for Unix-like operating system. And on top of that, I'll be using KDE Plasma. It is also a popular desktop environment for Linux-based operating systems. It is also my personal favorite. Let's wait some time for these things to be installed. Once the graphical installation is finished, we need to create a file which is required to load the GUI at the start of the system. This file is called xinitrc, which is located at the home directory of the particular user. We finished creating this file for user Neeraj. Let's see. Now we have this Gentoo system with a graphical user interface, KDE Plasma.